afternoon, or whatever time of day it is that you're tuning into this panel. My name is Fenit Nirappil, and I'm a reporter for the Washington Post, and I'm going to be moderating this panel discussion on work-life balance. The Nexus initiative strives to feature a wide range of career paths pursued by Kerala Christians, and as we're going to discuss today, not all of these career paths are going to give you a set 9-to-5 schedule every day. So I'd love to, so we have a great group of panelists here to talk about their experiencing balances the two. So let's meet them. Before we start talking about work, tell us more about your life. Where'd you grow up? Where are you living now? And what do you like to do outside of work? We'll start with Christina.
Hi, thank you, Fenit. So I'm Christina Varkey, and I was actually born and raised in Oklahoma, but currently living in Los Angeles as of July. I absolutely love the beaches, driving through the mountains. It's been a wonderful experience, but it has been challenging moving to a large city like LA in the middle of a pandemic. But I have been spending a lot of my time trying to give back to the community here. I know a lot of you have heard how California is really severely impacted by COVID-19. So a lot of the LA school districts have been completely shut down since March. So I've been trying to give back by tutoring to high schools within the STEM departments. And I'm also pursuing my master's in engineering. So things have been very busy, but very grateful to be here. So.
And how about you, Bobby?
All right, nice to meet you guys. I was born and brought up in Kerala, and then I came to Philadelphia, spent a few years in Philly. Then I moved around a lot while working for Intel in California, Oregon, Michigan, Illinois, Massachusetts, and finally settled in Princeton, New Jersey.
Shilpa, tell us more about your life.
Yeah, so I grew up in New York, lived in Dallas, Texas for a while, and lived in LA for a few years, and then New Mexico. And my husband and I decided to sell everything and travel the world. So we're in Turkey right now. Yeah, so travel is a huge passion of mine, and we're not letting the pandemic stop us.
We've got a good group of globetrotters here. All right, so let's talk about the work piece now. What do you do for a living, and how did you get into that career? And what are the hours like? Christina, how about you?
Yeah, so I work for an aerospace company where I'm a test and evaluation engineer for space systems. So this can be anywhere from spacecrafts to payload systems like satellites and even humans. So I got into the aerospace industry really because of the influence that I had throughout my life. My dad works in aerospace. The mentors that I had in college really advocated that I look into a career here. So I actually started my career working on the aircraft side, but then this opportunity to work space came up in LA. So I thought, why not try something new? And I've been loving it ever since.
What about you, Shilpa?
So I actually went to school for occupational therapy, so I have my master's in that. Wasn't necessarily my passion, it was just my safe job, which has helped me throughout my life for sure. But I was growing up, loved makeup artistry, and started my own business being a makeup artist. So I worked on a lot of weddings, and now I'm exploring more of my passions, other passions.
What kind of passions?
Travel, photography, creating. So I'm just at this stage of my life of just exploring different things right now.
Bobby, what's your work life like?
Yeah, I went to engineering, and during college years realized that I'm more cut out for sales and marketing. So I through internships, I moved over to a sales and marketing role, and it's been in sales roles for the last 28 years or so. I currently work for an enterprise software company called VMware, and I look after corporate clients. Hours are pretty long, and nowadays it's there's really no work hours. It's whenever it's needed, whether it's Saturday, Sunday. In fact, I was on a support call right before this one. So finding balance during this kind of a role is very important.
And that's the reality for so many people during the pandemic when work and home and life are all blending into one big thing together. For me, as a reporter for the Washington Post, I always like tell people the news never stops. So like
Yeah.
I don't really have a set start time and an end time. I have my down times and my up times, and I have to be prepared to drop everything at a moment's notice if some major news breaks at any hour of the day. So for many of us, well, for many of us Malayalis, our parents are immigrants who came here to give their children a better life, and that often meant working around the clock. So, what was your impression of work-life balance growing up, based on what you saw with your families? Bobby, what was it like for you?
Yeah, growing up in Philly, you see people working in different shifts, right? You have morning shift folks, you have evening shift folks, and you have night shift folks. And they all did things after they came back from their shifts. So long hours was pretty evident across the board. I've also seen a lot of people, particularly mothers, sleepless, days as well. And I've always wondered, how does this kind of continue for a long time, and what the next generation will really be like. So it was clear that a balance is needed. How you would get there, it wasn't quite clear because you needed the money. So if you needed the money, you had to put the hours in. And so that was kind of the foundation of my thought process when it comes to balance.
And that is a tricky balance to strike. What about you, Christina? What was your impression of the work-life balance?
Yeah, so I'll preface my answer by saying I think that we're all beneficiaries of our parents' hard work. But with that being said, I'm not trying to downplay our parents' lives, but they truly just didn't have a work-life balance because I think they just didn't have a choice. Immigrating here with practically nothing, and in order to make something out of nothing, they had to work really hard. So I don't think it was until recently, like maybe in the last decade or so, that they kind of built this more comfortable life for themselves and had more time for work-life balance. But growing up, when I was much younger, I thought this was it. I mean, your work was going to be your life until retirement. And now that I'm an adult, I know that's not the case. And I have all these choices and privileges because of how hard my parents worked.
I think that's been very resonant too. For me, my mother worked the overnight shift as an ER nurse, so that left very little time for having fun when she's working overnight and then sleeping by the day. And then sometimes Sundays you can go to church and there'll be community parties and things like that. What was it like for you, Shilpa?
Yeah, same here. My mom was a nurse as well, so she worked 2 full-time jobs to be able to, put us through school and to provide for 4 kids. So it was really, really hard to see her do that. And then when she was home, she was cooking and cleaning, so she was working around the clock. So I saw the same thing, and I thought that's what was expected of me. But I'm like, oh my God, I don't want that for myself, So it was really tough to see my mom, but like Christina said, I do get to live, as freely as I do now because my mom worked so hard. I am truly blessed for that.
So for us here today, was there a point in your career that you realized, all right, the time's come, need a better balance between work and life, can't necessarily do what my parents did. Did you have an experience like that, Bobby?
Yeah, working for Intel, they give out a sabbatical every 7 years. So every 7 years, you can go away for 3 months and come back to a same role or different role. And this was back in '99. We were just married a year in, and we were not sure if we could take the time, simply because my wife was just a year in. But then we decided, when are you going to get these kind of opportunities? So we went around the world for 2.5 months, New Zealand, Australia, Thailand, India, Europe, and back to the US. And more importantly, what we saw was, in the US, you tend to think all about, mostly focused about money or material assets, right? Houses, cars, etc. And through that trip, we saw a lot of people who are much happier with a lot less. You know, and I remember meeting somebody at their house, you know, essentially 2 rooms, but the fact that they were able to receive a guest and you know, share a meal, enjoy a time together, was a phenomenal experience for them. So I think that whole trip, you know, to this day, that's probably the best life experience so far. And to this day, we look back at it and say, you know, how important, how people really look at life in general, and how important it is to draw a balance. And we've taken a lot of lessons and actually implemented it throughout our lives.
Shilpa, you're in the middle of globetrotting right now, and you mentioned that you and your husband decided to drop everything. What precipitated that?
So my passion for travel, but I think, you know, I really shifted my perception on life and work and just enjoying life in general after my divorce. This is my second marriage, so my whole life fell apart when that happened. And I really reflected on all the things that I was doing according to everyone else's rules and how our parents raised us, right? Like you see them living their lives a certain way and you almost expect it that you're supposed to follow the same rules. And within our own communities, we have these expectations, which is really hard to live by. So I dealt with a lot of depression. I had, you know, my marriage fell apart. My work-life balance had a lot to do with that as well. You know, even with makeup artistry, I was working every weekend. I was almost using work to run away from myself, my own healing, my own marital issues, just everything, you know. So I think after that, I really started to look within, start my own healing. And now I'm like, you know, I'm done living life the way that everyone else expects me to. And, you know, we're like, what's stopping us? Why should we not do what we want to do? So we're like, screw it, let's just do something crazy while we have the chance. So
But
yeah.
thank you for sharing that experience in particular, because we know the stigma surrounding divorce in our community. And I say that as the son of divorced parents myself. Christina, what about you? Was there a point for you that you realized something had to change about that work-life balance?
Yeah, this is actually something I discussed in my Nexus feature a couple years ago, but I had a fairly demanding job where I was traveling so much. I mean, there was a point where I wasn't seeing my own bed for more than like 2 days out of a month. And I realized that I was using so much of my energy into my job, and so little of it was being put into important things like my family and my friends and my health. So for me, it's all about careful planning. There's a certain level of spontaneity that I enjoy, but when I have so many things going on, I have to plan carefully to ensure that I'm giving sufficient amounts of my energy into the things that are important to me.
And I found similar experiences too, because I think what I've learned over recent years is how important family is to me, because I'm the only one in my immediate family who's separated from everyone else, because I live in DC, whereas the rest of my family is in Georgia. And right now I'm in Georgia with my family. And I think the work from home environment has given me an opportunity to actually strike that balance more of both delivering for my employer and for my family, because like we've identified that you don't necessarily have to be in DC in order for me to be an effective reporter. And I'm curious if any of you found interesting strategies or opportunities because of the coronavirus pandemic. What about you, Shilpa?
Sorry, to stay connected to family, or sorry, I missed.
Any opportunities for the work-life balance that you discovered as a result of this pandemic?
You know, honestly, when it all started, both my husband and I were still working. I was working as an occupational therapist in nursing home, so we were still working. So the only thing that really affected us was we were in New Mexico. My family's in Texas, so we weren't able to go back and see my family as often as we wanted, which was really, really hard because we were spending, we just newly got married and they didn't have a lot of time to get to know my husband. So in that way, it actually affected us negatively. But otherwise, it did help us save a ton of money to be able to quit our jobs and go on this world tour. So, yeah.
What about you, Bobby? What's your pandemic experience been like for work-life balance?
Yeah, I would say I would kind of give two things. One is the pandemic one, and I would say one a couple of years ago. With regards to pandemic, I typically travel about 50 to 70,000 miles on the plane, and this came to a halt. And so it's 9 months now, right? No plane travel, and not even a 30-minute car ride. Pretty much 10 or 15 minutes, and you can run your life. And you realize that 9 months in, there's a lot you can do these days by not having to travel. So I would say moving forward, and if you travel every year like this, hitting 1,000,000 miles over time is like nothing. And you realize that you can cut a lot of that down because usually 1,000,000 miles comes with 200 100 nights in the hotel. So you add all that up, all of a sudden you look like a good chunk of your life is away from home. And this experience teaches you that you can probably do a lot more with the help of technology, from where you are, and then, make better choices when it comes to being away from home. The other experience I would say is, go ahead.
I was just saying, here I am at my mom's house while also at this convention, being able to do two things in one weekend.
Right. The other experience I would say is, I have a college freshman, and when he was in 10th grade, I realized that, the way he communicates, you had to be kind of with him at the end of the evening to really kind of understand what was going on with his life. Although prior to that, you can get on the phone and you can hear a lot of stories. So a couple of years ago, I had to make a decision whether I wanted to kind of move to a different role where I wasn't traveling as much. I mean, back then it was like 4 nights a row, in a week. And I made the shift. It was probably one of the best decisions, that I've made. So get off the corporate career ladder and then get into a place where there's a better balance with family and all that goes with it. And as a high schooler goes through 11th and 12th and goes through the college application process, as a dad, it was very, very helpful to be there logically, emotionally, and very rewarding for, as a parent. You can look back and say, hey, I did the right thing and I'm glad I made that choice. So I would say in the last few years, those are the two major lessons that's been very effective for our lives.
That sounds great too, that you were able to be with your son before he left the house and went off to college. Christina, what lessons have you been learning?
Yeah, well, I actually have a similar experience to Bobby. I think that when the pandemic hit, I was still in Oklahoma City and I had, we went all fully virtual and all travel was halted. So I think that was the most time I had spent with my parents in years. I spent, I think, maybe 3 or 4 months with them before moving out to LA. And it was honestly, it was such a great experience because I hadn't done that since I was probably in high school. So yeah, it was great.
Same thing with me. I've probably spent more time with my mother and my sisters this year than I have in like the last 5 years combined.
Yeah.
The demands of work, demands of family, and personal stress can all take a toll on your mental health. How do we reduce the stigma in our community related to mental health and seeking help? We'll start with Bobby.
Yeah, I think, if you look at every person's family, you can probably find a couple of people who are materially struggling with mental health. And I think if this generation is a little bit more open to talk about it. So that's the first thing is finding your guts to go talk about it. We live in a typical upper middle class gingerbread community, and you would think this kind of stuff doesn't happen at all. And if I count to you all the things that the school went through over the 4 years of my son's high school, between suicides and getting fired and getting arrested for this, that, and the other, you realize that that there's pressures from everywhere, whether it's a child, whether it's somebody who's working, and you've got to be able to kind of talk about it and let it out, and then figure out a plan to kind of deal with it, right? And I recently had posted a quote on Facebook that said, "Hey, get rid of some of these narratives in your head and purge that from your head and give yourself some headroom to kind of have more clearer thoughts," right? So everybody has to find their way, what makes sense. I run in the morning only because you're home every day. I run in the morning and run in the evening, try to at least every day. That helps a lot. In the summertime, we'll go for a walk, with my wife, with my son. I think you have to find these little things that you can do that helps you recharge day by day and not let it pile up and then, have an outburst.
Christina, what about you?
Yeah, so I agree with Bobby. I think that we need to talk openly about it in order to reduce that stigma. I think we also need to educate ourselves, use it as a learning opportunity, and then share what you've learned about mental health with others. And then I think we also need to encourage the equality between physical and mental illness. I know we all go in for our yearly physicals to get our bodies checked out, but we don't do the same for our minds. And I mean, our brain is also an organ, right? So encouraging that equality between our minds and our bodies can also be helpful.
And one way that I always describe it is, we don't get secretive about the fact that people in my family have diabetes or others in my family have had heart conditions. There's no reason to be secretive about the fact that people have mental health challenges too, because we should be comfortable in supporting each other through all sorts of medical conditions. Shilpa, what do you think the community can do to reduce that kind of stigma?
Absolutely the same. Talking about it openly. I started a podcast during the pandemic, actually, to talk about these kinds of things, because as I was going through my divorce, my own mental health struggles, I started sharing it on Instagram, so on social media, and I had a lot of people reaching out saying that they could relate or they're struggling with the same thing. And I'm like, oh my God, clearly we need to be talking about this, because when I was going through it, I didn't really have anyone I connected with or anyone who was willing to, really admit that they were struggling with the same thing. So I'm like, oh my God, we need to be talking about this, because everyone's hurting in their own way. Everyone's experiencing their own struggle, whether it's depression, anxiety, whatever else is going on. And we, it's seen as a weakness or something to be ashamed of, but it's very normal. It's very typical. And if we're not talking about this, we can't heal.
Absolutely. If we want to listen to your podcast, how do we find it?
It's on every platform you can listen to podcasts. It's Chic, Lotus, Controversial Conversations.
The other thing that I would say is when my son was about to leave for college, my wife and I thought it would be good to go get a couples counseling, right? Because you go from you having your life wrapped around your child to, okay, all of a sudden you have all this time. And when we went to see a counselor, out of the blue, she said, "Hey, Bobby, it looks like maybe you're kind of lightly depressed." And my immediate response is, "I don't know about what, because we got help, we got work, and and we have a good marriage." So sometimes you don't even know. You can feel like you're in really good health, and then when we talked through why she thought it was the way. We didn't conclude why she felt that way, but the point is, I think if you can seek out help like that, just like your annual physical, go get an annual mental physical, and take that feedback and really digest it.
We also touch on an important point, which is you shouldn't feel like you have to compare yourself to others that, oh, well, I'm in a better position than this person, or I can't complain because someone else has it worse. Like, we all have our own lives, and
Right.
you know, if our lives are encountering challenges, we should be able to take those challenges head on. So we're coming up at the end of our time now. So I guess for our final question for everyone is, how do you just avoid the burnout in your field? Christina, what about you?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I've been trying to study burnout and understand it better myself. I think that we have to understand that burnout is this state of emotional and physical and mental exhaustion that's caused by prolonged stress. So one way that I've been trying to combat this is to practice mindfulness, or just really being aware of my physical and mental state. I try to focus intensely on what I'm sensing and feeling in the moment, and just not judging myself for having those feelings. And I try to practice mindfulness when I'm stressed and burnt out, to really start peeling back those layers and understand what that underlying cause is for the stress.
What about for you, Bobby?
Yeah, I mean, I look at it at two ways. You know, one, you have to deal with it on a daily basis. So take micro breaks. You know, the other day I was complaining how my head was hurting. I wasn't even halfway through the day. It was literally because there was so much interruptions in the first 4 hours of the day, even though I was on dedicated to calls as well, right? So you have to take micro breaks, whether it's a 10-minute meditation, or taking a walk, or reading a People magazine, or doing something, you know, brainless, whatever that is. The other part is, you know, with the sabbatical trip, what we learned is that if you take something extended between a 5 to 7 year period, it also really, you know, you kind of refresh in a very wholesome way. So we make it a point somewhere between 5 and 7 years, every 5 and 7 years. And sometimes you get burned out, you feel like you're burning out kind of sooner. So it's towards the fifth year, or sometimes, you know, later to the 5 years, 7 years. We take longer breaks somehow, some way, you know, bend and break every rule to kind of make that happen, right? So that's what I would encourage for people to do.
Thank you. Then Shilpa, for our panelist living her best life, give us some
Yeah.
inspirational words to leave on.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, right now, I just try to, especially working for yourself, it's really hard because you can really just, you know, give it all, and you're like, don't have enough time for yourself. So I try to make sure I allot time to, like, this is work time, and this is relaxation time, this is workout time, and like making sure I'm staying physically active as well. And like Christina said, being mindful of how I'm feeling, why am I doing this, especially working for yourself. Like, I tend to have really high expectations. I put a lot on my plate, making sure that I know exactly why I'm doing something, and that are my expectations for myself way too high and unrealistic and unfair. But yeah, just living life, making sure I feel good as I'm doing everything that I'm doing.
Thank you, panelists, so much for coming on. This conversation has helped me feel more inspired that we can strike that right balance, and we can lead a rewarding life. So appreciate you volunteering your time for us.